Hiya mates, on the screen you will see 6 different questions as your recall starter on simplifying ratio. If you're unsure, look back in your book. Last week's work will have been on simplifying ratio. Okay, pause the video and have a go for the next 5 minutes writing down the questions and simplifying as best as you can. Okay, let's see how you got on. So, if we're looking to simplify the first ratio, okay, remember we're just finding a number that's going to divide into both the numbers that's on the screen. So hopefully you can see that we can divide that by 8, which gets me to 11, and 8 into 40 goes 5, so 11 to 5. The second one, in the form 1 to n, the left hand side has to go down to 1. So what number do we divide 11 by to get to 1? And it's just itself. 11 divided by 11 gives me 1, so I'm going to divide the other side by 11 as well. Okay, and my answer would be 1 to 3. Looking at the third one, I'm looking for a number again that goes into all 3. Okay, again, if you can see that 8 goes into that, we've used 8 on the first one. We've got 2 variables the same. Does 8 go into 16? Yes, it does. So 8 goes into 88 11 times, 8 goes into 16 twice, and 8 goes into 40 5 times. So again, it pretty much exactly the same as question 1 this time, but with a third ratio in place, but we're still dividing down exactly the same. Slightly more confusing when we start adding algebra into it as well, but the principle with the numbers is exactly the same. A number that will go into 10 and 22, so we can divide it by 2. That's going to give me 5, and 22 divided by 2 gives me 11. Anytime I'm dividing out, I could divide by 2a, because I've got an a in this question on both sides and both ratios, so I can take the a outside and divide by that. What have I got left? On the left hand side I've got 5b, so I would divide by 2a, would cancel that and cancel that to giving me 5, and the 2a would cancel the 22 to becoming 11, and it would cancel the a out as well. So my answer would be 5b ratio 11. If we look at the next one, let's just do the numbers first. So 39, I could divide that by 3. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 9 3 times, 3 goes into 6 twice, so I've got 13 and 2. Okay, now let's have a look at the letters. I've got a to the power of 7 and a to the power of 8, so I could take out a to the power of 7. That eliminates it totally on the left hand side, and a to the power of 8 would eliminate all of it apart from one lot of a. If I'm looking at the b's now, I've got b to the power of 1 on the right hand side, so I could take a b out as well, and I've got b to the power of 2, so I could take one of those b's out, so that would give me 13b ratio 2a. So I've simplified the numbers fully, and I've taken out as many algebraic terms as I can as well. So 13b ratio 2a. Now if we look at the last one that I've got here, if the ratio of sweets in a bag are mints to Smarties 2 to 3 and Smarties to Toffees 15 to 65, and there are 325 Toffees, how many mints are there? Okay, a slightly more difficult way of approaching this question. So okay, I'm just going to make a little bit of space for us to do some workings. Okay, so let's just make some space. So we have got mints to Smarties, and it's in the ratio 2 to 3, and we've got Smarties to Toffees, and that's in the ratio 15 to 65. Now if I'm thinking about how to do this one, I've got to have this ratio in place to be able to find it, or I've got to have this ratio in place to be able to find it. It doesn't matter which way I do it. So if I'm going to look at, I'll try and get the top one worked out. So to get from 15 to 3, I divide by 5. So if I divide this one by 5, 5 goes into 6 once, remainder 1. 5 goes into 15 3 times. So that's 2 to 3 to 13. If I wanted it to do the other way, I could say to get from 3 to 15 I times by 5. So to get from 2 to there I times by 5, and that's going to give me 10. So 10, 15, 65 is exactly the same as 2 to 3 to 13. Okay. Now if I use 2 to 3 to 13, I'm going to use that one. So mince to Smarties to Toffees, 2 to 3 to 13, and I know I've got 325 Toffees. Okay, it wants to know how many mints will I have. Well, if I divide 325 by 13, I'm going to find one part of that. Okay, and then if I can know what that is, I know what my multiplication factor is. So 325 divided by 13. 13 into 32 goes twice. That will be 26. 26 to 32 is 6. And 13 to 65 is 5. So my multiplication factor down there is 25. And I'm just going to multiply that by 2. So 2 times 25 gives me 50 mints. Okay, so my answer is 50 mints. Okay, so just going to click on the answers. You can see on the 5th question there, we don't necessarily need to put b to the power of 1 and a to the power of 1. We can just leave that as b and a. Okay, hopefully that made sense as a recap. Let's get on to dividing into a ratio. So there are 3 steps to this. Step 1, okay, is going to be add the parts. So we're going to add the parts of each ratio. So on this one I've got 2 to 1. So I'm going to do 2 plus 1 is going to give me 3 parts. Step 2, we're going to take the total, okay, which is 24 in this case, and we're going to divide by the answer to part 1, which was 3. So 24 divided by the total number of parts. So we add the parts, that gives me 3. I'm going to use the answer by saying total divided by the answer to number 1. So 24 divided by 3 is going to give me 8. Step 3. Okay, I take the answer to part 2, which is 8, and I multiply it by each ratio. So I've got my ratio of 2 times 8, that's going to give me 16, and I've got my ratio of 1 times 8 is going to give me 8. So my answer is 16 to 8. Okay, if you want to copy that down as a worked example. Okay, let's have a go at a couple of questions. If you want to pause the video and give it a go, then feel free. Let's see how you get on. Okay, so this one. Add the parts together. 7 plus 4 gives me 11. Part 2, 154 divided by 11. 11 into 1 doesn't go. 11 into 15 goes 1, remainder 4. 11's in 44 goes 4. So my answer to part 2 is 14. And then I'm going to take the ratios and times it by 14. The answer to part 2. So 7 times 14, 7 times 10 is 70. 7 times 4 is 28. That gives me 98 when I add that together. 4 times 10 is 40. 4 times 4 is 16. And that gives me 56. Now, if it helps you to write that out as 7 times 10 is 70, 7 times 4 is 28, and then add it to make my 98, 40 and 16 gives me 56. You feel free to do it that way as well. A good check is to say, looking at the end, if I add these two together, that will always give me my total that I start with if I've done it correctly. And then question 2. Okay, add the parts together. 4 plus 3, that gives me 7 parts. Divide the total amount by my 7 parts. 7 into 9 goes 1. 2 left over. 7 into 28 goes 4. Okay, I got 14 again. And this time 4 times 14. 3 times 14. So 4 times 14 we did in the last question, that's going to give me 56. 3 times 10 is 30. 3 times 4 is 12. Add it together gives me 42. So 56 to 42. Okay, well, let's move on. So step 2. Okay, so step 2, exactly the same style of ratio. Okay, the only difference with this one is we've got 3 different ratios to do it into. So rules are still the same and I'm still going to do the same working. So we're going to take 5 plus 3 plus 2. That's going to give me 10 parts. I'm going to take my 10 parts and I'm going to do 70 divided by my 10. Now I could make it easy and just divide by 7. Divide by 10, that gives me 1 into 7 goes 7 times. So each part is going to be 7. So 1 part equals 7. And then I'm going to multiply the ratios. 5 times 7, 3 times 7, and 2 times 7. 5 7s are 35, 3 7s are 21, and 2 7s are 14. Again, if I wanted to add all 3 parts to see that that makes sense, 35, 55, 56, 60, 70, total equals 70. So I'm happy that I've got that right. If you want to pause the video and have a go at the next one, feel free. Let's see how you got on. Okay, so 11 plus 9 plus 10 gives me 30. 180 divide by 30. Let's divide by 10 to make it a little bit easier. 3 into 18 goes 6. So I'm going to do 11 times 6, which is 66. 9 times 6, which is 54. And 10 times 6, which is 60. So 66, 60, and 54. Okay, part 3. Lil and Flo share £112 in the ratio 9 to 5. How much does each person get? So this is exactly the same style of question that we've just done in the first 2 steps. The only difference is that it's a slightly wordier question in the sense of they're just putting some more context to it, in the sense of it belongs to 2 different people. So Lil and Flo share 112 into the ratio 9 to 5. Now, because Lil's names comes first, that relates to the first ratio being number 9. Okay, and Flo comes second, so that relates to being she gets 5 shares of it. But the process is exactly the same. 9 plus 5 gives me 14. 112 divide by 14. Now at this point, if you are happy to use calculators, that's fine. You can use calculators alternatively. If you don't like dividing outside of the timetable range, we could say this is an even number, this is an even number. So I could halve both of those numbers to make it a little bit easier. Okay. Alternatively, I can just do my 14 times table quite quickly down the side here, and then just carry on with 14s. So 56, 70. Well, 14 doesn't go into 11, so I need to keep going down until I get to 112. So 84, 98, 112. So that's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So 14 goes into 112 8 times. So I'm going to times both my ratios by 8. 72 pounds for Lil, and 5 times 8 gives me 40 pounds for Flo, and that's how much each of them get. Like I say, if you wanted to have divided this by 2, you could have said, well, that's going to go into 7. Half of 100 is 50. Half of 10 is 5. Half of 2 is 1. So 56. And then 7 goes into 56 8 times. So it's entirely up to you which way you wanted to do that. If you want to pause the video, have a go at this one where we're just dividing into the ratio again. Let's see how you got on. So 11 plus 4 gives me 15. 75 divided by 15. We've got 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 5 times. So I've got 11 times 5 and 4 times 5, 55 to 20. Okay. Now, on stage 4, it's worded fairly much the same, but we'll have a read through it and you'll see a subtle difference. So we've got Jim and Tim. So on this one, we've got Jim and Tim, and they share some money in the ratio of 1 to 2. Okay, so we've got 1 to 2. So the ratio always follows that the first one is the first person, so Jim and 1, Tim and 2. Now it says that if Jim gets £13, how much does Tim get? Okay, now we don't know what the original amount was. Okay, so I can't add the parts, divide the total by the number of parts. So we've just got to look at the ratio that we've got here in the sense of how do I get from 1 to 13, and I'm just going to times that by 13. So because my multiplication factor is 13, I can do the same thing on the next one. 2 times 13 is going to give me 26. So Tim gets £26. Okay. Now sometimes that could be that we're going to get the one on the right hand side where we've not got a single one. It's not as easy to find out how we're going to get that. So I'll just work through this one and then I'll give you 2 questions to have a go at. So again, we've got Jim and Tim in the ratio of 11 to 7. This time it says if Tim gets £35, so that's on this side, I'm looking for what multiplication factor can I go from 7 to 35 with, and I know I'm going to times that by 5. So I'll do the same thing on this side, and that's going to give me £55 and £35. So pause the video and have a go at 2 questions. Okay, let's see how you got on. So, Jim and Tim, 9 to 7. Tim gets £98. How do I get from 7 to 98? Well, if I times it by 10, I would get 70. 11 is 77. 12 is 84. Add another 7. 13 is going to give me 91. And 14, 98. So I'm going to times that by 14. And I do the same thing on the other side. 9 times 10 gives me 90. 9 times 4 gives me 36. And add them together is going to give me 126. So he gets £126. Okay, and the one on the right, 4 to 7. Jim and Tim. Tim gets 70. Slightly easier, this one's just times him by 10. So Jim gets £40. Okay. Exercise 5. So Mary and Ramesh share money into the ratio 2 to 1. If the difference between their shared money is £12, how much did they share? So on this one, we know that it's Mary to Ramesh in the ratio of 2 to 1. This time, the difference between their shared money. So we want to find the difference between that. So 2 take away 1 gives me 1 part. Okay, and 1 part equals £12. So we know the difference on this one is £12. How much did they share? So if that equals 1 part, Ramesh has £12, Mary has £24, and I'm adding these two values together. 12 plus 24 gives me £36 is what they've shared. Okay, pause the video, see how you get onto the one on the right. Okay, let's see how you did. So Mary and Ramesh. Mary had 11 parts, Ramesh had 3 parts. Difference between their shared money, so we're going to find the difference between that. Well, 11 take away 3 gives me 8 parts. And 8 parts equals £40. Okay, so if I can easily find 1 part, let's divide that by 8. That gives me 1 part. Divide 40 by 8 gives me £5. So if £5 is 1 part, times that by 5, Ramesh has £15, times 11 by 5, Mary has £55. Okay, how much did they share? 55 plus 15 is going to give me £70 in total. And the very last part, I'm going to leave this one just so that we've got a bit of space to work on. In a right angled triangle, the ratio of the non-right angles is A to B equals 1 to 4. So let's think what I've got. I've got my right angled triangle. Right, we know that this angle is already 90 degrees. So that means knowing the rule that A plus B plus C, A plus B plus C has to equal 180 degrees. And we know that C is 90 degrees. So A plus B plus 90 equals 180. I can take away the 90 degrees, so I know that A plus B has to equal 90 degrees. Now, if we go back to A ratio B, A is 1 part, B is 4 parts, and we know that the total is 90 degrees. So if I've got my total being 90 degrees, I can do the same thing as we did when we first divided into a ratio. 1 plus 4 gives me 5 parts. 90 divided by 5, 5's into 9 goes 1, remainder 4, 5's into 40 goes 8. So each part is 18, so that means that angle A is 18 and angle B is 4 times 18, so that gives me 4 times 10 is 40, 4 times 8 is 32, add them together gives me 72 degrees. So listing it down, A is 18 degrees, B is 72 degrees, and C is 90 degrees. And that lists all the 3 angles. Okay, so if you want to have a go at that, pause the video and then see how you get on. Okay, so let's see how we did. First one, you should have had 40, 50 and 90, and the one on the right you should have 30, 60 and 90 degrees.